Nero is probably the most infamous emperor Rome ever had. History paints him as a monster. The man who murdered his own mother, killed his wife, kicked his pregnant second wife to death, lit up parties with human torches, and supposedly played the fiddle while Rome burned. But those same history books also say the people of Rome loved him. Nero was anti-corruption, cut taxes, expanded slaves' rights, and even banned the death penalty. So, which is it? Was Nero a cruel, insane tyrant? Or something more complicated? That's what this story's about. Sure, I'll talk about all the horrific stuff he did, but by the end of this, you might start questioning not just Nero's story, but how history itself is written and who gets to write it. Rome's royal bloodline was a tangled mess, like one of those family trees that just turns into a full-blown spiderweb. Nero was born the great-great-grandson of Emperor Augustus, not exactly next in line for the throne, but still very much part of the conversation from birth. His mother was Agrippina, his father Gnaeus. Gnaeus died young, and Agrippina, ever the power player, married Emperor Claudius, who then adopted Nero. Claudius already had a biological son, but he clearly favored Nero. His advisors weren't thrilled about that. They warned Claudius that Nero was spoiled, detached, and showed signs of cruelty. And since Claudius had just followed Emperor Caligula, one of Rome's most unhinged rulers, you can see why people got nervous. But Nero himself didn't seem too interested in power. His mother, on the other hand, definitely was. Agrippina lived for control and manipulation. Her marriage to Claudius was likely just a political move. She wanted her son to become emperor, no matter what it took. And well, she got her wish. Claudius died suddenly, allegedly poisoned by Agrippina with a plate of mushrooms. Historians debate that part, but honestly, it fits her character a little too well. With Claudius gone and his son too young to rule, 16-year-old Nero became emperor of Rome. Once on the throne, Nero basically said, "Yeah, I don't actually want this job." He did whatever he wanted instead. At that time, artists were the lowest of the low in Roman society, but Nero adored them. He was creative himself, so he started hanging out in theaters and bars, sometimes getting drunk and randomly joining stage plays just for fun. He even threw massive public orgies and once married a man who took part in one. Whether he truly related to the lower classes or just liked their company, one thing was clear: they loved him. His charisma and rebellious, artistic energy made him a people's favorite. And he didn't just talk, he took real action. Nero inherited a broke empire drowning in debt, so he restructured the tax system to help ordinary people. He lowered taxes on individuals and businesses, funded public works to create jobs, and gave slaves the legal right to file complaints against their masters, something unheard of at the time. He even ended a war peacefully with the Parthian Empire. So yeah, the people loved him. But the elites, the Senate, they despised him. To them, Nero was making a mockery of the throne, mingling with artists, empowering slaves, and acting like some commoner. So Nero built his own circle of trusted allies, one that didn't include his mother. Agrippina, who had expected to rule through her son, was furious. She started supporting Nero's stepbrother Britannicus as a potential rival, and that's where Nero's downfall begins. Nero found out his mother was plotting with Britannicus to overthrow him, so he poisoned Britannicus first. Problem solved. Then came Agrippina. Nero started to wonder if he even needed her anymore, and decided he didn't. He invited her onto a boat secretly rigged to sink. It did, but Agrippina survived, swimming to shore. When she reached land, Nero's soldiers were waiting. They stabbed her to death. It's said that as they approached, she told them to stab her in the stomach, the place where she had nurtured the monster. It's poetic, almost too poetic, and maybe it didn't even happen that way. After Agrippina's death, Nero tried to spin the story. He told the Roman people that his mother had taken her own life, but nobody bought it. Word spread fast, and soon everyone knew he'd murdered her. Public opinion began to shift. At the time, Nero was married to Octavia, a woman adored by the people. She was graceful, charming, and deeply involved in public life. Rome loved her. But when she couldn't give Nero an heir, he turned on her, tried strangling her multiple times, and when that didn't solve his problem, he divorced her instead. The people were furious. They protested in the streets, outraged that Nero would humiliate Octavia, their beloved empress. But instead of listening, Nero saw this as a challenge, a chance to remind everyone who really held the power. So he had Octavia executed. By now, the walls were closing in. The people were turning against him, and the Senate had hated him from the start. A group of Roman elites finally decided enough was enough. They plotted to assassinate Nero. There wasn't even a clear plan for what would happen after his death. They just knew he had to go. But before they could strike, Nero found out. He executed 20 people on the spot and exiled a dozen more. Up to this point, Nero had been a cruel ruler, but after the failed assassination, he completely lost it. This is where the Nero from your nightmares, the mad emperor, truly comes to life. Not long after, disaster struck. Rome was engulfed in a massive fire that burned for 6 days straight, destroying 2/3 of the city. The famous story says Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned, but that's pure myth. For starters, fiddles didn't even exist back then, and Nero wasn't even in Rome. He was at one of his country estates when the fire started. When he heard the news, he rushed back and opened his palace to survivors, giving shelter to anyone left homeless. The legend of him playing music while the city burned was likely just a metaphor, one that history took a little too literally. But metaphors aside, Nero wasn't exactly innocent either. After the fire, he began building a new palace, massive, extravagant, with a 120-foot statue of himself right at the center. The people couldn't help but wonder, did Nero burn down Rome just so he could rebuild it in his image? To squash those rumors, Nero needed a scapegoat, and he found one. At the time, Christianity was a small, fringe cult in Rome. Easy to blame, easier to destroy. Nero accused the Christians of starting the fire, rounded them up, and unleashed unspeakable torture. Some were torn apart by wild animals, some were nailed to crosses, and others were burned alive. Their bodies used to light Nero's garden parties. Around this time, Nero's second wife, Poppaea, was heavily pregnant. One day, in a fit of rage, he kicked her to death, striking her stomach again and again until both she and the unborn child were gone. He then had her body embalmed and preserved in glass, so he could visit her every night and talk to her corpse. And if that wasn't enough, Nero later spotted a 13-year-old boy named Sporus, who looked eerily like Poppaea. He had the boy kidnapped, castrated, dressed in Poppaea's clothes, and forced to live as Nero's new wife. He even paraded Sporus around in public as a Roman empress, and on stage, Nero would perform plays wearing a mask of Poppaea's face. Meanwhile, the empire was falling apart. His new palace and colossal statue had drained Rome's treasury dry. When Nero ordered his advisor Vindex to raise taxes, that was the final straw. Vindex defected, joining forces with the governor of Spain and the royal guard to overthrow him. By now, Nero was living in constant paranoia. He knew death was coming. One morning, he woke up to an empty palace. He ran through the halls screaming for help, shouting into the silence, "Do I have no friends left? Not even an enemy?" With no one left to protect him, Nero fled to one of his estates in the countryside. When soldiers came for him, he begged his slaves to kill him. They refused. So Nero took his own life, stabbing himself in the neck while saying his final words, "What an artist dies in me." Nero had once been adored by the common people, a ruler who gave them rights, opportunity, and entertainment. But those people didn't write the history books. Here's the thing about Nero. Everything we know about him comes from just three men: Tacitus, Cassius Dio, and Suetonius. All three were wealthy political elites. All three despised Nero, and all three wrote about him decades after he was already dead. By the time they put pen to paper, Nero's entire family line was gone, and Rome had a new dynasty in power. So of course, it was in their best interest to drag his name through the mud. The worse they made Nero look, the better the new regime seemed by comparison. Their writings followed a classic Roman political tactic called vituperatio. Basically, the ancient version of say whatever you want about your enemies. No limits, no rules, no fact-checking. You could straight up make things up, and people would just nod along. And when you look closely, a lot of the stories about Nero start to fall apart. For example, that famous line about his mother begging to be stabbed in the stomach where the monster was nurtured. That exact line appeared in a play written just a few years before. A fictional story with completely made-up characters. Even the accounts of the Great Fire sound suspiciously recycled. They match earlier stories of other Roman cities being burned in attacks. And then there's Poppaea, the wife he supposedly kicked to death while she was pregnant. But here's the thing. Nero was obsessed with her. He was mourning their lost child and desperate for another. Would it really make sense for him to kill her? There's no hard evidence he did, only claims made by his political enemies. And even that story, the murdered pregnant wife, was a popular trope in Roman literature at the time. Over the centuries, Nero's name became synonymous with evil itself. Some scholars even argue that the concept of the Antichrist was modeled after him. But now, modern historians are starting to wonder, maybe Nero wasn't the monster we've been told he was. Maybe he wasn't a saint either. But he might not have been the devil. The story of Nero is one of history's greatest reminders of just how powerful narrative control really is. Because the truth is, history isn't written by the most honest people. It's written by the ones who get to hold the pen. We'll probably never know who Nero truly was, or what really happened 2,000 years ago. But in the end, it almost doesn't matter. Because when it comes to history, what's written counts more than what's true.